The signal drifted through endless dark space, weak and broken like a whisper lost in the wind. It came from a far and forgotten world called Vuren 3, a planet so dangerous that most maps marked it only with a warning symbol. The air there could strip the metal from ships, storms could turn cities into glass, and the creatures that lived there were stronger than iron. The Vuren people had always been fighters, but now even they were close to extinction. Their world had turned against them. They had sent their last call for help across the stars, hoping that someone, anyone, would listen. For weeks nothing happened. The great powers of the galaxy heard the cry and turned away. The council said the risk was too high. The diplomats said it was not worth the cost. The traders said there was no profit in saving a dying world. So the message kept echoing, fading a little more every time it passed through another relay. Then one quiet night on a small human listening post orbiting Mars, a technician named Ryan noticed the faint signal hidden in the static. It was weak, almost unreadable, but the tone in it was clear. It was the sound of fear and pain. He tried to clean it up, to make sense of the strange alien language. When he finally decoded it, his hands trembled. It was not a message of anger or threat. It was a simple plea for help. Ryan sent it up the chain of command. Within a day, the signal reached the Terran Defense Authority. The higher officials met behind closed doors. Some said it was none of their concern. Others said it was a chance to learn more about the Deathworlders, a race known for their strength and stubbornness. The message was shared with the leaders of Earth's military and science divisions. At first, they all assumed someone else would take the responsibility. But then something shifted. News of the signal leaked. People started to talk. Humanity had always seen itself as small among the stars, yet proud. They remembered their own history, the times when they had been the ones calling for help and no one had come. So the idea spread that maybe, this time, they should be the ones who answered. In the streets of Earth's cities, people argued. Some said it was madness. Others said it was duty. Reporters spoke about it on every channel. The image of the dying planet filled the screens, showing broken skies and firestorms that never stopped. Scientists said the place was impossible to survive on. Military voices warned that even if they sent a ship, it might never return. Yet, under the noise and fear, there was something else growing, something deep and stubborn. It was the old human spirit that had built ships to cross oceans and rockets to reach the moon. Inside a hidden construction yard orbiting the moon, a team of engineers began to work on something that had no name at first. They were told to design a ship that could survive a world like Vuren 3. They studied every record of Deathworld conditions, every type of radiation, pressure, and toxic storm known to science. The engineers argued, worked, and argued again. They melted metals, built new alloys, and tore them apart to start again. Slowly, a design began to form. It was not sleek or beautiful. It looked more like a weapon than a ship. Its hull was layered with armor that could take a direct meteor strike. Its engines were built to run in chaos. Its systems could operate even when every sensor was blind. It was not built to save a planet. It was built to endure one. While the ship took shape, another team worked to choose the people who would fly it. The selection was not open to everyone. They searched for those who had already looked death in the eye and kept going. Soldiers who had fought in hopeless wars, engineers who had survived disasters, scientists who had lost everything but still believed in building again. These were not heroes in shining armor. They were tired men and women, scarred, quiet, and unbreakable. When they were told what the mission was, some laughed and thought it was a joke. When they realized it was real, they all gave the same answer. They said yes. Weeks turned into months. The world watched as rumors grew. Some said humanity was preparing to invade. Others said they were sending angels. The truth was neither. They were sending a ship called the Resolute. It was not built to conquer or destroy. It was built for survival. Every bolt, every wire, every engine part carried the weight of that purpose. The crew trained inside sealed domes filled with toxic air. They walked through simulated gravity storms. They learned to fight when they could barely stand. Each day pushed them closer to the edge of what humans could endure. Yet none of them quit. Ryan, the technician who had first found the signal, was given a small seat on the communication deck. He did not expect it, but the captain insisted that someone who had heard the first call should be there to hear what came after. The captain herself was a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice. She never made speeches. When people asked her why she volunteered, she said only that humanity was born on a death world too, and it was time to remember that. When the day of launch came, Earth fell silent. The ship rose from its dock like a shadow covered in light. Its engines burned brighter than anything the moon had ever seen. Children watched from classrooms. Old soldiers saluted from hospital beds. The message that went with the launch was simple. It said, "We go because no one else will." Days passed as the Resolute crossed deep space. The crew lived in silence, each person lost in their thoughts. They had all seen the scans of the planet they were going to. They knew that the moment they entered orbit, every storm, every gust of radiation could destroy them. Yet they also knew that turning back was not an option. Humanity had chosen to go, and they were its hands. As they neared the edge of the Vuren system, the sensors started to fail. The ship's shields burned brighter, struggling to hold off the strange energy burst coming from the dying star nearby. The crew worked around the clock to keep systems running. The captain stood by the main window and watched the first glimpse of Vuren 3 appear. It was not a planet anymore, but a scar across the stars. Great red clouds covered its surface. Oceans boiled into vapor. Mountains crumbled into rivers of fire. On the planet below, the last Vuren shelters picked up the signal of the incoming human ship. Their leaders panicked. For generations, they had believed that no one would ever dare come near their cursed world. To them, the ship was not a symbol of hope, but of danger. They armed what weapons they had left. They prepared for the worst. The human ship slowed and entered the upper atmosphere. Every alarm screamed. The hull shook like it would split apart, but the humans did not stop. They descended through ash and lightning, through storms so violent that they tore satellites to pieces. The captain gave only one order to her crew. She said, "Hold on." When the ship finally broke through the clouds and the landing gear touched the surface, the ground itself shook. The humans looked out at a wasteland of dark glass and fire. The air outside could kill in seconds. Yet they were ready. They stepped out wearing heavy suits, their boots sinking into ash. The Vuren scouts watched them from the cliffs, their eyes wide with disbelief. The humans walked like they were born to survive in death. The Vuren had never seen anything like them. Their own soldiers could barely last minutes on the surface, yet these strangers moved calmly, scanning the ruins, setting up equipment, helping each other without words. One of the Vuren whispered that they must be monsters. Another said they must be gods. But the truth was simpler. They were humans, and they were here because they refused to let another world die alone. Back inside the ship, the captain recorded her first log. She said they had made contact, that the world was worse than anyone imagined, that the air burned and the ground moved like a living thing. She said there were survivors hiding below, afraid of them. She ended the log with a quiet line. She said, "They asked for help, we came. We will not leave until we try." Outside, the storms raged again, covering the ship in dust and fire. The Vuren scouts watched from a distance as the strange metal beast stood against the wind. They had sent a call for help, expecting mercy or rescue. What they got instead was something far more dangerous. They got humans, and from that moment on, the story of both worlds would never be the same. The ship stood silent under the broken sky while the crew worked to make it their home. The air outside was poison, so they stayed inside as much as they could, checking the readings and planning how to move forward. The storms came and went like waves of fire, shaking the ground and covering everything in ash. The captain knew that if they waited too long, the planet itself would swallow them. She ordered her people to prepare the machines, to start building small stations around the ship that could test the air and soil. Every step outside was a fight. The suits were heavy and the heat made it hard to breathe even with filters. Still, the crew worked. They were not here to rest. They were here to survive. Far from the landing site, the Vuren watched the humans through cracked lenses and broken screens. The sight of the strange visitors confused them. They had seen others before who came from the sky. Those had arrived with promises and left with ruins. The humans looked different, but the Vuren could not trust easily. Their leader sat in the dark shelter and listened to the reports. He wanted to believe that help had come, but fear whispered that death had come instead. When one of his scouts returned with a small human device found near the storm plane, he studied it. The object was built for endurance, solid and practical. He could feel the intention behind it. It was not made for war. It was made for survival. That made him curious. Inside the ship, Ryan kept monitoring the strange signals from the planet's surface. The static was thick, but sometimes he could hear patterns, something close to language. He spent nights trying to match those sounds to the message they had first received. Slowly, he began to understand small parts. He realized the Varen were still alive, hiding in deep tunnels. When he told the captain, she stood silent for a long moment. Then she gave a short nod. It was time to make contact. They prepared a small exploration group. 5 people went out with supplies and scanners. The storm had settled for a few hours, giving them a narrow window. The land was quiet but not peaceful. Every rock and shadow looked like it was waiting. They walked for hours across the gray plain until they found the entrance to an old mining shaft. The scanners showed heat signs below. The captain ordered a signal light placed on the ground, a soft pulse of blue to show they came without weapons. Then they waited. At first, nothing happened. Then a movement appeared in the darkness of the tunnel. Figures slowly climbed out, tall and scarred, their skin marked by burns and age. The Vuren leader stepped forward holding a staff made of twisted metal. His voice was deep and slow, speaking in words the humans could barely follow. The translator picked up fragments. He asked why they had come. The captain answered through her helmet speaker. She said they came because they heard the call. The leader looked at her for a long time. Then he said that others had said the same thing before and none had stayed. The captain took off her glove and pressed her bare hand against the heated ground. She said quietly that this place felt like home. That moment changed something between them. The Vuren lowered their weapons and invited the humans to follow them underground. The air inside the tunnels was heavy and filled with dust, but the temperature was lower. The walls glowed faintly from minerals. The humans saw hundreds of Vuren living in carved chambers, weak and thin but still alive. Children stared at the visitors with wide eyes. Old warriors watched silently. The leader guided them to the central chamber where a small energy core flickered weakly. It was their last power source and it was failing. The captain examined the core with her engineers. They realized it could be repaired with parts from the human ship. When the Vuren leader asked what they wanted in return, the captain said nothing. She only said that if they could survive here, then so could anyone. They returned to the surface, carrying the plan with them. For the next weeks, the humans and Vuren began to work together, though trust came slowly. The humans brought heavy tools and sealed suits. The Vuren offered knowledge of the tunnels and minerals. Together, they rebuilt the energy core and restored light to the underground shelters. When the power returned, the children cheered. For the first time in years, the darkness broke. The work did not stop there. The captain wanted to make the surface livable again. She ordered construction of atmospheric filters using parts from the Resolute. Every day, the crew went out to plant machines across the wasteland while the Vuren helped carry supplies. They built towers that could clean small pockets of air. The storms destroyed many, but some survived. Slowly, the scanners showed that the air near the landing site was becoming a little less toxic. It was a small change, but it meant everything. At night, the humans sat around the portable heaters listening to the wind outside. Sometimes Vuren guards joined them, curious about the newcomers. They asked questions about Earth. The humans told simple stories of rain and green fields, of oceans that moved like living glass. The Vuren listened quietly. Some smiled for the first time in a long while. They told their own stories in return, of the early days when Vuren 3 had been bright and full of life before the sky broke and the storms came. Rian recorded every word. He said the galaxy needed to hear it one day. As the days turned into months, something unexpected began to happen. The Vuren started to copy the humans. They began to rebuild their old machines with stronger metal. They started training their young to work in pairs, just like the human engineers. The captain noticed and said nothing, but she felt proud. She saw that the Vuren were not weak. They only needed to remember what strength looked like. One morning, a violent storm hit the region without warning. The winds tore through the equipment fields and buried half of the filters. The crew rushed to secure the ship. The Vuren leader ordered his people to help. They formed chains, moving heavy panels through the storm. The humans stood beside them, guiding and repairing even as debris flew past them. Ryan fell once when a shockwave hit, but a Vuren warrior caught him before he slid away. They both laughed after that, even though the air burned their suits. When the storm finally passed, the land looked new again, wiped clean and covered in red dust. They had lost machines and supplies, but they had survived together. That night, both species shared food and silence. No words were needed. In the following weeks, the humans started sending messages back to Earth. Most of them never reached home because the storms broke the signal. Still, they kept trying. Ryan recorded simple updates. He said the mission was alive, that the planet was slowly breathing again, that humans and Deathworlders had learned to stand together. The captain rarely spoke in the recordings. She spent her time walking the ruined ground, checking every new tower herself. She often looked up at the dark sky as if she could see the stars through the dust. One evening, she found the Vuren leader waiting outside the ship. He said his people had decided to give the humans a name in their language. The word meant those who walk through fire. He said it because the humans did not bring peace or pity. They brought will. The captain thanked him but said they were only doing what anyone should do. He shook his head and said not anyone could do this. Inside the ship, the crew rested for the first time in months. The metal walls were scratched and the floors covered in dust, but they felt proud. They knew the mission had changed. It was no longer about aid or research. It was about survival and unity. The Resolute had become a bridge between two death worlds. The humans had learned from the Vuren how to face fear with calm. The Vuren had learned from the humans how to fight for every inch of life. When Ryan made his last report of the month, he said something that stayed in the records. He said they came to help but ended up learning what it truly meant to endure. Outside the ship, the wind howled again, but this time it sounded less angry, almost like it was carrying a message through the dust. The humans looked out at the dark land and knew they were not alone anymore. The death world had not been tamed, but it had found new guardians. The ship stood silent again under the torn sky, not as a visitor but as a part of the world itself, glowing faintly in the stormlight, a sign that even on the deadliest ground life could begin again. The storms had become a part of their lives now, and no one feared them anymore. The humans had learned how to read the changes in the wind, while the Vuren had learned how to repair the filters before they broke. Together, they made the ruined land a little more stable each day. The air near the ship had started to change its color. It was still heavy and filled with dust, but not as deadly as before. The scanners showed that tiny living cells were returning to the air. It meant that the planet was healing slowly. The captain stood on the ridge one morning watching the sky. The red clouds looked thinner and patches of light began to show through. She thought it almost looked like dawn back on Earth. She knew they still had far to go, but she also knew that they had already done something no one believed was possible. Ryan worked in the communication bay trying to keep the signal open to Earth. It had been weeks since they heard anything back. The storms kept breaking the lines and the ship's power cores were starting to wear down. Still, he kept sending updates, hoping that somewhere far away someone was listening. Sometimes he would record the sounds of the planet, the strange, deep echoes that came from the moving ground. He said it made him feel like the world itself was alive and watching them. The captain listened once and said maybe it was. Inside the tunnels, the Vuren had begun to rebuild their old city chambers. With help from human engineers, they restored lights and air systems. The children who once hid in the dark now ran freely through the tunnels. The humans taught them simple things like how to grow food using small hydro systems. In return, the Vuren taught the humans how to find stable ground that would not crack open during the heat cycles. It was a trade of knowledge built on trust, not power. Every night, both sides gathered in the main chamber to share reports. The language barrier was no longer a wall. They had made a new shared code of words and signs. When someone spoke, the others listened. One day, the sensors on the ship picked up strange readings from deep underground. It looked like moving energy. The engineers thought it might be a hidden power source or a leftover reactor from the old Vuren cities. The captain decided to investigate. A joint team of humans and Vuren prepared to go below. They carried lights, scanners, and protective gear. The tunnels grew narrow and the air got thicker. After hours of walking, they found a huge chamber buried under the rock. In the center stood a broken machine taller than any building they had seen. It was covered in dust and rust, but still pulsing faintly with blue light. The Vuren leader explained that it was one of the ancient cores that once held the balance of the planet. Long ago, when it broke, the sky began to burn and the storms were born. The captain and her engineers examined it closely. They realized that if they could restart the core, it might stabilize the planet's magnetic field and calm the weather. But it was risky. The machine was old and unstable. One wrong move could cause a massive explosion that would destroy the tunnels and kill everyone. The humans looked at one another and then at the Vuren. The leader said they had already been dying for years, so taking one more risk did not matter. The captain nodded and said then they would do it together. They worked for days inside that dark chamber. The humans replaced wires and circuits while the Vuren cleared debris and built support pillars to hold the walls. Everyone worked without rest. The temperature rose until the air shimmered. At one point, the old machine started to hum louder and the ground trembled. The captain ordered everyone to step back, but the Vuren leader stayed near the control node. He said he could feel the rhythm of the planet through the vibrations and he knew what to do. He placed his hand on the glowing panel and guided the humans to link their power cells to the core. Ryan monitored the readings and shouted that it was working. The blue light grew brighter until it filled the entire chamber. Then there was a deep sound like thunder rolling through stone. For a moment everyone thought it would explode, but instead the light spread upward through the cracks in the ceiling. On the surface, the Resolute shook and alarms screamed. The sky turned white and then slowly faded back to red. When the dust cleared, the scanners showed something incredible. The air pressure had stabilized. The storms were still there, but weaker. The planet's heartbeat had slowed. The captain stood outside the ship looking at the horizon. She could see the faint curve of sunlight trying to break through. It was the first time since they arrived that natural light had touched the ground. She felt tears behind her helmet and quickly wiped them away. When the team came back from the tunnels, the Vuren cheered. They beat their staffs on the stone floors and raised their hands to the sky. For them, it was not only a victory, but a rebirth. They believed the spirits of their ancestors had returned through the light. The humans smiled and shared their joy. The captain gave credit to both sides. She said they had done something no single species could have done alone. That night, the underground halls echoed with music. The Vuren played low instruments made from the bones of ancient beasts while the humans clapped and tapped their boots. The sound was rough but full of life. The following weeks brought new challenges. The main reactor of the Resolute had started to weaken from the heavy use. The engineers did what they could, but the materials they needed no longer existed on the planet. They talked about trying to repair it using local minerals, though no one knew if it would work. The captain gathered her officers and told them that if the ship failed, they would still continue the mission on foot if they had to. She said that they did not come all this way to stop halfway. Her words spread through the crew and gave them new strength. Ryan often walked outside alone when the storms were calm. He liked to record the sound of the wind and send small voice messages into space. He never knew if anyone heard them, but it helped him feel less far from home. Sometimes he saw Vuren children following him from a distance. He would turn and wave at them and they would run away laughing. He said to the captain that maybe one day those children would explore the stars just like humans did. The captain said maybe one day they would do it together. Then one evening they saw something strange in the sky. A bright streak of light moved fast across the horizon. At first they thought it was a meteor, but the scanner showed it was not. It was a ship, small and damaged, entering the atmosphere. The humans prepared for contact. The Vuren gathered near their shelters. When the small ship crashed a few miles from the base, the captain led a rescue team. They found wreckage scattered across the plain, and inside it 3 beings unlike any they had seen before. Their skin was pale and their eyes dark and hollow. The translator identified them as a species known to the Galactic Council. They were part of the group that had refused to send aid months ago. The survivors were weak and frightened. They said their vessel had been caught in a gravity storm and forced down. The captain brought them to the ship and offered medical help. The Vuren watched from a distance with suspicion. To them, these outsiders represented the same council that had ignored their cries. The captain assured them that no harm would come from helping the wounded. For days, the humans treated the survivors and shared food with them. Slowly, the outsiders began to understand what had happened on this world. They could not believe that humans had landed here and survived. One of them asked why. The captain said because they could not watch another world die while they did nothing. When the outsiders repaired their ship enough to leave, they promised to report what they had seen to the council. Whether they did or not, no one knew, but the humans and Vuren did not care. They no longer needed anyone's approval. They had already proved that 2 species born on dangerous worlds could create life where there was none. As time went on, the humans built a new station next to the ship. It was made from local stone and metal, designed to last through the storms. The Vuren began to move their shelters closer, forming a small city between the hills. They called it the Crossing because it was where 2 worlds met. The captain often walked through the new streets at night watching both species work side by side. The light from the power towers reflected off the dust, making everything look golden. The planet was still hard and cruel, but it no longer felt hopeless. The humans had come as strangers, And now they were family to the Vuren. The storm still roared in the distance, but their sound had changed. It was not a threat anymore. It was a song of endurance. The captain looked up at the faint stars through the red haze and thought of Earth. She wondered if anyone back home knew what had really happened here. She knew that even if no one remembered their names, the story of this place would live on. It was the story of those who did not bring mercy but strength, who did not come to conquer but to stand beside another dying world and help it rise again. And as the wind carried the dust across the plains, the humans and the Vuren kept building side by side under the fading storm sky. Two kinds of Deathworlders proving that survival was the most powerful form of peace. The days on Vuren 3 were no longer silent. The sound of hammers, drills, and footsteps filled the wind. The humans and the Vuren worked side by side on the new settlement they called the Crossing. It was strange to see two species who once feared each other now building together like old friends. The humans taught the Vuren how to use heavy machinery, while the Vuren showed the humans how to sense the coming of storms before they appeared on scanners. The air was still rough and the ground still moved at times, but everyone had learned how to live with it. They did not fight the planet anymore. They moved with it, worked with it, and respected its anger. The captain spent most of her days outside the ship now. She helped plan new housing modules and oversaw the building of small weather stations across the plain. Her voice had become softer, but her eyes stayed sharp. The Vuren leader often walked beside her. They did not need translators anymore. They understood each other through simple words and silence. He told her stories about how his people once believed the storms were living spirits that punished weakness. She told him that on Earth people once thought the same of the sea. They both laughed at how fear could make legends out of nature. Ryan continued to work on communications. He had finally managed to repair a part of the old long-range array. The ship's power was weak but enough to send bursts through the static. Every night he sat at his console sending updates, telling Earth that they were alive, that the Vuren were no longer dying, that the planet was slowly waking again. He never got a reply, but he kept sending. Sometimes he said maybe Earth was listening and maybe one day someone would come. But he also said that even if no one came, it would not matter anymore. They were already home. The Vuren children had started to play outside near the human structures. Their laughter mixed with the hum of machines. They no longer wore masks all the time, because the air around the settlement was cleaner now. It still tasted of metal, but it no longer burned the lungs. The humans and Vuren had built a garden dome using sealed glass panels. Inside it, they grew simple plants that could live in low oxygen. Seeing green again after so long made both species silent the first time they walked inside. The captain touched one of the leaves and said it reminded her of home. The Vuren leader said maybe it reminded the planet of home too. One day a new kind of storm appeared. It came from the northern ridge where no one had gone before. The scanners showed it, moving slower but with strange energy inside it. The air around it glowed faint blue. The captain ordered everyone to shelter while a team went out to study it. She led the team herself with Ryan and two Vuren warriors. They rode small crawler vehicles across the red plain. As they neared the storm edge, their sensors picked up something unusual. There was a signal coming from inside the storm, not natural but artificial, a pattern of sound like a beacon. They followed it until the light became too strong. They stopped the crawlers and stepped out. The wind blew in spirals but did not strike them. It was like standing inside a breathing wall. Through the glowing dust, they saw shapes half buried in the ground. The team cleared the dirt and uncovered pieces of old metal, smooth and curved. Ryan realized it was not Vuren technology. It was older, much older. The Vuren leader said in a quiet voice that their ancestors used to tell of beings who came before them. Builders who had made the first energy cores of the planet. The captain recorded everything and took samples. She said this storm was not a danger but a reminder that the planet still held secrets. When they returned, the crew gathered to see what they had found. The metal pieces carried strange marks that no one could read. The scientists thought it might be part of an ancient control system that once managed the weather itself. If they could understand it, maybe they could stabilize more regions of the planet. The idea gave everyone hope again. They started new research stations near the ridge and built shelters for the teams who would stay there. As the work grew harder, the supplies began to run low. The reactor of the Resolute could no longer support all systems. The engineers calculated that soon they would have to shut down parts of the ship to save power. The captain knew what that meant. Without the reactor, the ship would never fly again. It would become part of the planet forever. She gathered her officers and told them that if that was the price to keep the world alive, then it was worth it. None of them argued. They had all seen what life had become here. They knew that leaving now would destroy everything they had built. The decision was made quietly. The engineers began transferring the ship's remaining power to the atmospheric stabilizers. The reactor would soon be removed and planted deep under the soil as a permanent energy source. The Vuren watched the humans work with respect. To them, the humans were giving their ship to the planet as an offering. The leader told his people that the humans were no longer visitors but true Deathworlders like them. Ryan worked day and night to finish one final message to Earth before the reactor shut down. He recorded every part of their journey from the first landing to the building of the crossing. He spoke about the Vuren and how they had taught humans what it meant to stand firm. He ended his message by saying that if anyone ever found their signal, they should know that humanity had not gone to conquer the stars, but to heal one small corner of them. He sent the message and watched the signal fade into space. The day of the reactor move came. The humans and Vuren gathered outside as the engineers guided the glowing core out of the ship. The light from it was bright enough to make the dust shimmer like gold. They carried it on heavy transports toward a crater near the new city. The captain walked in front, the Vuren leader beside her. When they reached the crater, the engineers lowered the core into a deep shaft built for it. When the final switch was pulled, the ground trembled and a low hum spread through the air. The stabilizer towers lit up one by one across the horizon. The air shimmered, the clouds thinned, and for the first time in recorded memory, the sky of Vuren 3 showed a clear patch of blue. Everyone stared at it in silence. No one spoke for a long time. Some of the Vuren fell to their knees. The humans stood still, their faces hidden behind helmets but their eyes wet. The captain looked up at the sky and whispered that it was beautiful. The wind blew gently instead of raging. It felt like the planet itself was breathing easier. That night the settlement celebrated with food and song. The Vuren brought old instruments and the humans shared their rations. They sat together under the open patch of sky, and for the first time stars were visible through the thin clouds. Later the captain returned to the ship. The halls were quiet now and the lights dim. She walked through the empty corridors, touching the walls that had protected them for so long. Ryan followed her and asked if she felt sad. She said no, only grateful. She said this ship was built for war, but it had become a seed instead. Ryan smiled and said maybe one day people on Earth would hear their story and know that the most dangerous worlds could still give life. The captain nodded and said maybe that was the real reason humans were chosen to hear the call in the first place. In the following weeks, the new energy core powered the growing settlement. The Vuren began to explore farther lands. They found rivers starting to flow again under melted ice. The humans helped build bridges and labs to study the soil. They planted more garden domes and even small forests under protective screens. Every day they found new signs of life returning. Birds that had vanished long ago were seen flying again near the hills. The sound of their wings was soft and strange but filled the people with joy. The captain started to record her own message to the future. She spoke of what they had learned, of how survival was not about fighting alone but about standing together. She said that when they first arrived, the world tried to kill them, but instead it taught them patience. She ended the message by saying that if anyone ever found this planet, they would not find ruins. They would find home. The ship became a monument in the center of the settlement. The Vuren placed stones around it with carvings of both human and Vuren symbols. They called it the Heart of Fire because its core had given life back to the world. People from both species came there to sit and think when the winds were calm. The captain would sometimes stand there quietly, watching the dust move over the metal hull, remembering how it once shone in space. Ryan continued to send short signals, though the power was weak. He said he liked to imagine that somewhere out there another world might hear and know that Deathworlders were not cursed but chosen. The humans in the Vuren kept building, kept learning, and kept living. The storms returned sometimes, but never with the same rage. They had been tamed by the will of two stubborn species that refused to die. The sky remained half red and half blue for many seasons, like a sign of what the planet had been and what it was becoming. When the captain looked at it, she saw the reflection of both Earth and Vuren in the same light. She smiled softly and said the universe had finally seen what it meant to survive together. And in that moment, under the new dawn of a once-dead world, she knew their story was no longer just about saving a planet. It was about proving that even in the darkest corners of space, life would always find a way to rise again. The seasons on Vuren 3 began to shift slowly, and the air grew clearer each passing cycle. The blue patch of sky widened across the horizon, and small clouds floated lightly instead of raging storms. The humans and the Vuren had learned to live like one people. They shared tools, stories, and even their languages had started to mix into a new form that both could understand. The old human ship stood in the center of the settlement like a giant relic. It no longer hummed with power, but its body was covered with vines and light moss. Children played near it every day, and their laughter echoed through the metallic shell. The captain often stood on the upper platform, looking over the city that stretched far into the plains. The once barren land was dotted with green domes, wind towers, and small canals that carried water from the northern ridge. The planet was no longer silent. It had started to breathe again. The Vuren leader had grown old, but his eyes were still bright. He often said the planet had finally forgiven them for the wars of their ancestors. He and the captain met every morning to discuss the progress of the crops and the exploration teams. They planned to reach the far side of the ridge where the ancient storm had revealed the buried metal. The scientists believed more structures might be hidden there, maybe even an old control core that could explain the strange weather patterns. The captain agreed that it was time to look deeper. She said that if the planet was truly healing, then it would not mind if they sought its heart. Ryan worked with a group of young Vuren engineers to build small survey drones using parts of the old ship. The drones were light, painted in dull gray to blend with the dust. They sent the first few units over the ridge and waited for data. The images that came back showed deep cracks in the ground leading into what looked like a massive cavern. The walls of the cavern reflected light like metal. The captain decided to lead another expedition herself. The Vuren leader insisted that his people would join too. They prepared for the journey for several days, packing food, air tanks, and light machines for digging. When they reached the ridge, the air was thin and sharp. The wind blew gently but carried a strange hum like a distant song. They followed the cracks until they found an opening large enough to enter. The light from their suits showed smooth tunnels leading downward. The air inside was cold but dry. As they moved deeper, the walls began to glow faintly with blue patterns that pulsed slowly, as if alive. Ryan recorded everything. He said the energy was similar to the readings they had taken near the ancient storm, but stronger. The captain touched the glowing lines and said they felt warm like veins under skin. After several hours, they reached a vast chamber. In the center stood a structure shaped like a spiral tower half buried in the rock. It was not made by the Vuren or humans. The material looked older than both. The team moved closer and found a small platform near the base covered in symbols. The Vuren leader looked at them closely and said some of the markings matched old carvings found in their oldest temples. He said his ancestors used to speak of sky spirits who built the bones of the planet and left them behind when they fell asleep. The captain smiled faintly and said maybe those spirits were travelers like them. They decided to set up a small camp near the structure to study it. Ryan connected scanners and began translating the symbols. The readings showed traces of dormant energy still running through the walls. When he tried to activate the console, the blue lights flickered and spread across the room. Everyone stepped back as the spiral structure began to glow brighter. A low hum filled the air and dust fell from the ceiling. The captain ordered everyone to stand by, but the glow stabilized. A beam of light shot upward through the ceiling and out into the open sky. The team outside reported seeing a pillar of blue light rising from the ridge, visible even from the city. The captain contacted them and told them to stay calm. She said it was not an attack, but a signal. The beam continued for several minutes before fading slowly. When the light vanished, the air in the cavern felt warmer and lighter. Ryan checked his instruments and found that the surrounding atmosphere had increased in oxygen and pressure. He said whatever this structure was, it seemed to be part of the planet's old system to regulate the environment. The captain realized they might have reawakened a forgotten network that once kept the planet stable before it became a death world. The discovery spread through the city when they returned. The people gathered near the ship to celebrate. The Vuren leader said the planet's heart had opened its eyes again. Over the next months, the weather improved in many regions. The soil became softer and water began to flow naturally through cracks that had been dry for centuries. Animals once thought extinct appeared near the rivers. The humans in Vuren recorded every change. They expanded their farms and built new homes farther from the main settlement. The crossing had become a real city now, with roads, schools, and a central hall where both species made decisions together. The captain was chosen as one of the first council members, while the Vuren leader became the elder voice. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the captain received a signal on her old communicator. It was faint but clear. Ryan ran into her office holding a scanner showing a frequency that matched Earth's standard emergency code. The message repeated every 10 seconds. It was coming from deep space, not far from the outer system. They both looked at each other without words. The captain ordered a team to boost the antenna power. After hours of adjustments, the message finally came through clearly. A voice spoke saying this was the United Human Fleet survey ship Aurora, responding to the lost vessel the Resolute. They had found the signal sent years ago and had arrived to assist. The captain listened in silence as the voice continued, saying they were in orbit waiting for contact. The entire settlement gathered near the landing zone as a bright light appeared in the night sky. The ship descended slowly through the thin clouds and settled on the plain outside the city. The air shimmered around its hull. When the ramp opened, a group of humans in clean white suits stepped out, looking around at the strange mix of human and alien structures. The captain walked forward with the Vuren leader beside her. The newcomers stopped when they saw them. The leader of the Aurora stepped ahead and saluted. The captain returned the gesture. The man said Earth had thought they were all dead. The captain said maybe they were once, but not anymore. The newcomers were amazed at what they saw. They walked through the city and recorded everything. They spoke with the Vuren and took samples of the air and soil. They were shocked to see how the planet had changed. They said according to Earth records, this world was classified as uninhabitable forever. The captain told them the planet had only needed time and care, not fear. The Aurora's commander offered to take them home, but the captain refused gently. She said they had already found home here. Many of the humans from the Resolute agreed. Some of the younger ones thought about returning to Earth, but when they saw the children playing with the Vuren and the blue sky above, they changed their minds. The Aurora crew stayed for several days repairing their ship and sharing supplies. They sent long-range messages to Earth describing what they found. The captain knew that soon other ships would come. Maybe researchers, maybe settlers. She hoped they would come with the same respect. Before leaving, the Aurora commander gave her a small beacon that could contact Earth directly. He said if they ever needed help again, they would come faster. She thanked him but said she hoped the planet would never need saving again. When the Aurora rose into the sky, the people watched in silence. Its light faded among the stars but left behind a faint trail like a promise. The Vuren leader turned to the captain and said the universe had finally remembered them. She replied softly that maybe the universe had simply waited for them to remember themselves first. The years that followed brought more visitors. Ships came not with weapons but with scientists, engineers, and builders. They worked under the guidance of the first settlers and the Vuren. Together they mapped the planet, restored ancient systems, and built new cities. The world once called Deathworld became known across the colonies as the Living Forge, because it had taught two species how to live again. The captain grew older, but her presence remained strong. She often walked among the new gardens with Ryan, who had become head of the communications center. He sometimes looked up at the sky and said he still sent signals into the stars, even though now everyone knew they were alive. The captain smiled and said, "Keep sending them, because stories like theirs should never be forgotten." The planet continued to bloom slowly. The storms became mild winds. The rivers grew wide and full of fish. Children from both species learned in the same schools and spoke a new shared language. They did not call themselves humans or Vuren anymore. They called themselves the Bound because they believed their lives were tied to the planet that had nearly destroyed them and then gave them a second chance. As the sun set one evening, the captain stood on the ridge where she had first landed years ago. She looked out at the lights of the city glowing in the valley below. The ship that had once carried them across the stars now stood silent and peaceful among trees and flowers. She thought of the first days when the air burned their lungs and the ground shook with rage. Now it was quiet, almost gentle. She whispered that death had never truly owned this world. It had only been waiting for someone brave enough to listen. And as the wind moved softly through the grass, she felt the planet answer her in silence.